Walk out to your pepper plants right now and count the flowers. Go ahead, count them. If you can count every flower on that plant on one hand, then you have the exact problem this video is going to fix. Because right now, somewhere in your garden, there's a big, green, perfectly healthy looking pepper plant that should be dripping with flowers, and it's giving you almost nothing. And here's the part that's going to sting a little. It is not because you did something wrong. It's because of one nutrient and one mistake that almost everybody makes without ever knowing it. A mistake that most people try to fix by doing the exact thing that makes it worse. 1 spoon of a single, cheap powder, watered into that soil, and within 2 to 3 weeks, that plant can explode with flowers, often twice as many as before. And twice the flowers means twice the peppers. This isn't a trick, and it isn't a fertilizer commercial. This is plant chemistry. The exact chemistry of how a plant decides whether to grow leaves or make fruit. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll know the 1 spoon, the 1 mistake to stop making today, and the exact moment to do it. And the very first thing you need to see is why your healthiest looking plants are often your worst producers. Here's the scene, and tell me if this is you. You planted your peppers, you watered them faithfully, you gave them the sunniest spot you had, and they grew beautifully. Tall, lush, dark green, leafy, the very picture of a healthy plant. And you were proud of them. But then you waited, and you waited. And the flowers never really came, a few, maybe. And of those few, some just turned yellow and dropped clean off the plant before they ever became a pepper. So here you are in the middle of summer with a gorgeous green bush and almost nothing to actually eat. And you're confused because you did everything right. You gave that plant water, sun, and care, and it handed you leaves you can't eat instead of peppers you can. Now, most people, when they see a plant that won't produce, do one thing. They feed it more. They grab general purpose plant food or whatever bag is in the shed and give it a big dose, thinking this will give it the energy to make peppers. And I need you to hear this next sentence clearly, because it is the most important one in this entire video. That is the exact thing that is stopping your peppers. You are not helping the plant flower. You are, without realizing it, ordering it to keep making leaves. And to understand why feeding your plant more can actually starve you of peppers, you have to understand 3 little numbers printed on every bag of fertilizer you've ever bought, because one of them is quietly sabotaging you. Every fertilizer has 3 main numbers on the bag. You've seen them, like 10, 10, 10, or 24, 8 to 16. They stand for the 3 big nutrients, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium in that order. Nitrogen, the first number, is the leaf and stem nutrient. It drives green, leafy, vegetative growth. Phosphorus, the middle number, supports roots and flowering. And potassium, the third number, is the flower and fruit nutrient, the one that governs whether a plant actually blooms and sets fruit and how good that fruit turns out. Here's the trap. Most general fertilizers, and almost every lawn product, are heavy on nitrogen. And nitrogen works. It builds a big, impressive green plant. But a plant flooded with nitrogen gets one very clear message. Conditions are good, keep growing, keep making leaves, there's no rush to reproduce. So it pours everything into foliage and puts flowering on the back burner. Your plant isn't broken. It's doing exactly what you told it to do with the food you gave it. You told it to grow leaves. It grew leaves. That lush green bush with no peppers isn't a sick plant. It's an overfed one. Overfed on the wrong nutrient. And if you spend any time on this channel, you already know the pattern. Every single thing I show you here is one cheap, forgotten piece of knowledge that quietly beats the expensive, complicated way we've been sold. And it's almost always something the people before us understood by instinct, and we somehow lost. This is another one. Subscribe right now because piece by piece we're rebuilding all of it. So if too much nitrogen is the problem, the fix is the opposite. And it comes down to one specific powder, with a history older than you'd ever guess. Let me show it to you. What your flowering peppers are starving for isn't more nitrogen, it's potassium. And the cheapest, cleanest way to give it to them is a plain powder called sulfate of potash. You'll also see it labeled potassium sulfate. On the bag, its numbers read 0050, all potassium, nothing else. You can buy a bag at any garden center or online for a few dollars. And it will feed your garden for years because you use so little of it. And here's a piece of history that tells you how old and how proven this is. Potassium got its very name from the old way people used to get it, potash, pot-ash, because for centuries that's exactly what it was, the ash left in the bottom of the pot after burning wood, which our ancestors soaked and spread to feed their crops. They didn't know the word potassium. They just knew that wood ash made things fruit better, and they'd used it that way for hundreds of years before anyone ever printed a number on a bag. In fact, potash was so valuable that it became one of the first great exports of colonial America. Whole forests were burned and their ashes boiled down into barrels and shipped across the ocean. And here's a detail I love. The very first patent ever granted by the United States government back in 1790, signed by George Washington himself, was for a better method of making potash. The first patent in this country's history was for the very thing your peppers are starving for. Chemists later gave it the name potassium, and its symbol on the periodic table, the letter K, comes from an old word for that same plant ash. Every bit of it traces straight back to the ash in the bottom of the pot. So why has nobody told you to reach for potassium instead? Follow the money for a second. Nitrogen is the cheap, high-volume workhorse of the fertilizer world, and it does one thing brilliantly. It makes a plant turn deep green and shoot up fast, almost overnight. And fast green growth is what sells a bag off a shelf because it's the result you can see in days. Potassium's work is quieter and slower. It happens inside the plant, in the flowers and the fruit over weeks. There's no fortune to be made telling you to feed your plant less nitrogen and wait. So the flashy, nitrogen-forward products get pushed to the front, and the humble bag of potash sits ignored in the corner, quietly doing the work nobody advertises. This is not new science. It's ancient knowledge with a modern label. But knowing what it is only gets you halfway. If you don't understand exactly how it works, you'll get the timing wrong and waste the whole thing. So let me show you the bloom chemistry itself. Here's how it actually works, and this is the part I find genuinely fascinating. Potassium does something no other nutrient does. It manages the plant's internal traffic, the movement of water, and crucially, the movement of sugars. When a plant makes energy in its leaves, potassium is what physically drives that sugar out of the leaves and toward the places that need it most, the flowers and the developing fruit. So when a plant has plenty of potassium, it finally has the machinery to push its energy into blooming and fruiting, instead of just holding it all in the leaves. Potassium is the nutrient that says, stop building the factory, start shipping the product. And there's a deeper layer. Potassium also switches on dozens of the plant's key enzymes, the little biological machines that run photosynthesis and build those sugars in the first place. So potassium isn't only moving the energy around, it's helping the plant make more of it to begin with. A plant low on potassium is like a factory with a weak power supply and no delivery trucks. It can't make much, and it can't move what it does make. But here's the second half of the magic. Potassium also controls the tiny pores on a plant's leaves that manage water, which means potassium is what gives a plant its ability to handle stress, heat, drought. And here's why that matters for your peppers. One of the biggest reasons flowers fall off before becoming fruit, that yellowing and dropping called blossom drop, is stress. A stressed plant sheds its flowers to save itself. A plant loaded with potassium holds onto its flowers through a hot spell instead of dropping them. So potassium does two things at once. It drives the plant to make more flowers, and it helps the plant keep the flowers it makes. More blooms and fewer lost. And it doesn't stop at the flowers. That same potassium that moves sugar into the fruit is what makes the peppers themselves bigger, thicker-walled, and sweeter with deeper color. So you don't just get more peppers, you get better ones. And there's one more quiet benefit worth knowing. Because potassium runs the plant's water and sugar systems, it also makes the whole plant tougher and more resilient. Sturdier stems, better resistance to disease, and a stronger constitution against stress overall. A potassium-rich pepper plant isn't just more productive, it's simply harder to knock down. So the same spoon that fills it with flowers is quietly building a stronger plant underneath them. Now you know what it is and why it works. So here is exactly how to use it. But first, one quick way to read your own plant and be sure this is your problem, because the signs are hiding in plain sight. There are two tells. The first we've covered, a big, lush, deep green plant with lots of leaves and few flowers, is the classic signature of too much nitrogen, overfed and underblooming. The second is a sign of outright potassium hunger, and once you see it, you'll spot it everywhere. Potassium deficiency shows up first on the older lower leaves as a yellowing and then a browning, scorched, crispy look along the very edges and tips. The margins go dry and burnt looking, while the center of the leaf may still be green. If you see either of those, the lush but barren look or the scorched leaf edges, you've found your problem and the spoon is your answer. So let's mix it. Take 1 level tablespoon of sulfate of potash and dissolve it fully in 1 gallon of water. Stir until the powder is completely gone and the water is clear. Then pour that solution into the soil at the base of your pepper plants, soaking the root zone. About a gallon handles a few plants, so scale it to how many you've got. Do this once every 2 weeks through flowering and fruiting. Want to give it an extra push? Put the same solution in a spray bottle and lightly mist the leaves in the cool of the early morning or evening, never in the hot midday sun. Because the plant can take potassium in through its leaves too, and the effect comes on faster. And if you'd rather do it the old free way, the potash way, you can use plain wood ash from a clean wood fire, sprinkled lightly around the base and watered in. But here's the honest catch. Wood ash also raises your soil's pH, making it more alkaline, so use it sparingly, a light dusting only. And don't use it at all if your soil is already alkaline or you're growing something that likes it acidic. The bagged sulfate of potash is more precise and won't move your pH around, but the ash is real, it's free, and it's what worked for centuries. And here's what to expect, so you're not staring at the plant the next morning wondering if it worked. This isn't an overnight change. Potassium works with the plant's own rhythm. In the first week, you may see nothing at all on the surface. By the second week, you'll often notice new flower buds forming where there were none before. And by around 3 weeks in, that's usually when the plant is covered. The flush of blooms you were waiting for. Patience is part of the recipe. Give it the 2 to 3 weeks it needs before you judge it. Now, before you go all in, I have to be honest with you about when this won't work. Because there are a few other reasons peppers refuse to bloom, and potassium can't fix all of them. First, that word double is not a guarantee carved in stone. The biggest, most dramatic jumps happen when you'd been overfeeding nitrogen. Flip a leaf-heavy, bloom-poor plant to potassium, and the change can genuinely be that big. If your feeding was already balanced, the gain is real, but more modest. Second, potassium only fixes the problem if a lack of it, or too much nitrogen, was what held your plant back. If your daytime temperatures are soaring past the low 90s, peppers will drop flowers no matter what you feed them. That's heat, not nutrition. And the answer is shade and patience. If your plants aren't getting enough hours of direct sun, they won't bloom well, period. If flowers open but never set fruit, you may have a pollination problem. Peppers often need a little wind or a gentle daily tap to shake the pollen loose. And if your plant is still very young and small, let it build a body first. A tiny seedling actually needs some nitrogen early on before you switch it to flowering mode. Third, don't overdo it thinking more is better. Too much potassium can block your plant from taking up magnesium and calcium and cause new problems. Stick to the 1 tablespoon per gallon every 2 weeks. The right amount at the right time is everything. Let me show you exactly what that right amount at the right time did in my own garden, because the before and after genuinely surprised me. I had 4 pepper plants that had become the most beautiful, leafy green bushes you ever saw. And by the middle of July, between all 4 of them, I counted about 6 flowers total, and half had already yellowed and dropped. I'd been feeding them, proudly, with a general all-purpose food I now know was heavy on nitrogen. I was, without knowing it, telling those plants to keep making leaves, so I stopped. I mixed 1 tablespoon of sulfate of potash per gallon, soaked the roots of all 4, and did it again 2 weeks later. And within about 2.5 weeks of that first feeding, those plants were covered in little white flowers. Not 6, but well over 40 on each plant, all over them. And this time, they held. By the end of the season, those same 4 plants, which had given me almost nothing, were so loaded I was giving peppers away to the neighbors. My wife, who'd watched me fuss over those barren bushes for weeks, laughed at the pile on the counter and asked what I'd finally done to them. 1 spoon of the right powder at the right time. That was the whole of it. And the best part is how little it costs to do. Which is where this stops being a gardening tip and starts being almost absurd. A bag of sulfate of potash costs a few dollars, and because you use a spoon at a time, it lasts several seasons. Wood ash is completely free if you burn wood. Compare that to a whole summer of tending big, beautiful plants that feed you nothing. Or to buying at the store the very peppers you were trying to grow. This was never expensive. It was just never explained. Let me answer the questions I know are coming. Does this work on other plants, or just peppers? It works on essentially every fruiting and flowering plant. Tomatoes especially respond the same way. And so do cucumbers, squash, eggplant, even your flowering ornamentals. Can I just use a tomato fertilizer instead? Yes, a good tomato and vegetable feed is simply one formulated lower in nitrogen and higher in potassium, which is the whole principle. The sulfate of potash is just the cheap, pure version. What about banana peels? Aren't those full of potassium? Honestly, a whole peel buried in the soil releases it far too slowly and unreliably to matter this season. If you want to use them, compost them first. Does rain or watering wash it away? Potassium doesn't leach out of soil as fast as nitrogen does, but in pots and in heavy rain it does move, which is exactly why we feed it every 2 weeks rather than once and forget it. Should I use the powder dissolved, or can I just sprinkle it dry? Dissolved in water is faster and more even, and it's what I'd recommend during flowering. You can scratch the dry powder lightly into the soil surface too, but it works more slowly, waiting for water to carry it down to the roots. Is it safe to eat off of? Will it be on my peppers? Completely safe. It's a plant nutrient that goes into the soil and up into the plant, not a chemical sprayed on the fruit. Just rinse your peppers as you always would. Will too much really hurt my plants? Yes. Overdosing locks out magnesium and calcium, so respect the rate. Does it work in pots as well as the ground? Absolutely. And pots often need it even more because frequent watering washes nutrients out faster. And when exactly do I start? The moment your plant is established and you see the first flower buds forming, that's your cue to switch it from a leafy diet to a flowering one. So here's the whole thing, start to finish, so you get it right every year. Early on, when your plants are young and just building their bodies, a balanced feed with some nitrogen is fine. Grow a strong plant first. But the moment you see those first flower buds, that's your cue. Stop the high nitrogen feeding and switch to potassium, 1 tablespoon of sulfate of potash per gallon at the roots every 2 weeks, right through flowering and fruiting. Grow the plant with nitrogen. Fruit the plant with potassium. That's the whole secret in one line. I want to leave you with one thought. We've been trained to believe the answer to any struggling plant is to feed it more. More product, a bigger dose of whatever's in the flashiest bag. But growing food was never about brute force. It was about understanding what a plant is actually trying to do and giving it the one thing it needs at the one moment it needs it. Our ancestors knew wood ash made their crops fruit better and used it for centuries before there was ever a science aisle to sell them a substitute. You don't need the expensive 4-step program. You need to stop overfeeding nitrogen and 1 spoon of potassium at the right time. That's the trick nobody teaches. Now, do me a favor. Drop a single number in the comments. How many peppers did you get off your plants this year? Just the number. I read every one, and I want to see how bad this problem really is out there. And come back in 3 weeks after you try this and tell me what happened. Next time, I'm going to show you the forgotten trick the old-timers used to make their tomatoes set fruit in the worst heat of summer, when everybody else's flowers were dropping to the ground. One simple thing, done at one time of day, that almost nobody does anymore. Subscribe so you don't miss it, and remember, the people who came before us, who grew their food with their own 2 hands, knew a great many things we'd do well to remember.